CRPN Central. This is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe. It helps the mission more than you know so that I can do more for you. Welcome to TrialSide Chats. Hey, I'm trying something. If you're out there and you're making a comment or you want to make a comment, I turned on this new option where you can see the comments in real time on the screen. So don't troll me, everyone. Be careful what you comment. So you're going to be seeing it as people talk. Welcome to TrialSide Chats. Are you ready for August? It's state fair season. So did anyone go to the fair? Anyone like going to the fair at all? Any exciting concerts that you're going to? What's the crazy fried food on a stick that is the big craze this year? I'm curious. So have to let me know in the comments what you're going to in your community events. All right, now we're going to do Welcome to TrialSide Chats. Welcome to TrialSide Chats, these places where we come together, talk about finance, specifically finance for clinical research, so we can all come together and try to find best practices that can help everyone succeed in the industry. Full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, never said I was a lawyer, and so therefore this is the culmination of experiences, so please listen, read, and make decisions based at your own risk. If you don't agree to this disclaimer, please just turn the video off now. No harm, no foul, but I want to make sure that you, everyone out there that is listening, have everything that you need to succeed. All right, so today we're going to be talking about finance, anything finance. This is a very sensitive subject, must be confidential. We're not going to talk names. We will not talk organizations, only concepts so we can target best practices. And if you feel like you can follow these rules, reach out to me, come on stage. Let's talk about your story, share your story with the community so that maybe we can help each other improve. All right, icebreaker. This is something that's really been hitting hard recently, especially the way that the industry is trying to go versus how it's actually going to happen. So I had a friend and he just had a podcast and they were talking about this. What is your problem with portals? Come on, Dr. Fox, what the heck? You're such a cave person. What's your problem with portals? I don't understand what you have against innovation. Okay, well, I don't know. So portals are those online, probably web-based logins that you have to do to accomplish a certain thing, right? So in this event, what they're talking about is payment portals. Specifically, clinical trials have sponsors that pay a third-party vendor to host some kind of an online portal so that the theory is sites can log in at self-serve. Sites log in, they can submit their payments in that portal. They can go in there and they can get their payment detail in that portal. Everything has to do with that portal for that trial or for that sponsor. Some of the third-party portals are getting a little more sophisticated where sites do have like an ID and all of their trials are on that portal when they log in. But keep in mind that this is a big problem, everyone. I love the innovation. I love the concept of trying to streamline things, but this is a giant tug of war of control that is going the wrong direction for the site. Let me tell you a couple of case studies. Okay, why not? So we do a lot of audits, right? We do a lot of audits where we go in and there's a site, they don't manage their finances or something's wrong. And so we go in and we try to make sure that they have all the places that they need. What would happen if you have this one person who's credentialed for a site who just so happens to have your finance portal? That finance portal is attached to a cell phone number. It's attached to all these things to that single person, not their company phone. It has to be their cell phone. It has to be something that's attached to an individual. That's how these portals work. They credential to an individual to represent an organization. What's going to happen if that person dies? What's going to happen if that person rage quits? What's going to happen if the site is dependent on a third-party portal that they cannot control to run the finances for a trial? What's going to happen if a site isn't allowed to send an invoice because the sponsor doesn't accept invoices? They only accept these portal submissions, which, by the way, now the site's going to have to maybe pull or do that in a CTMS, maybe enter it into their accounting software, and then go over to a portal and somehow make all of those systems link up in a manual fashion. So I have no problem with innovation at all. What I do have a problem with, however, is unfortunately this grasp for control of a site's ability to manage its finances from a vendor that is not in the site's best interest. That vendor is paid by the sponsor, which means if the sponsor says, you know what, we'll just shut off access, your site just got screwed. You literally cannot manage your contract because you're depending on someone else to give you credentials. Story after story, I've seen six figures just gone because sites work in portals. I've seen sites never be able to remit. I've seen sites just have their finances paralyzed for months, and I mean months, half a year sometimes, because the CRO or the sponsor will not grant access to another person to access the portal for that site. So I have a very, very big problem with portals only because they are done in the wrong way. If you want to do this the right way, industry, I'm looking at you. I promise I'm not going to say names, but I'm looking at you, all of you third party portal vendors who are selling something to the sponsors. You need to make master users that are at the site level that can control access for that site. Um, any other way is just not going to work. I'm sorry. And mark my words, if you portal wall everything, the sites who properly manage their aging and send invoices anyway in QuickBooks will just age out your trial. You'll be non-compliant and you'll be out of that site. So I highly recommend you really, really consider the end user when you're talking about how wonderful these portals are, because honestly, the experience absolutely sucks. All right, soapbox over, let's go. So book, QR code, Amazon. Contact me if you would like to buy it directly from CRPN. 10% off, free shipping. I'll even sign it and draw a happy face for you if you want. Publication alert, Cambridge University Press. Congratulations, Brad Hightower. These are validated methods now. They have been peer reviewed. They have demonstrated millions, with a plural of dollars, that were collected and responsible in the industry at a private site. Highly recommend. It's a good read. And if you want to add to it, go write your own paper. Trust me, it's not a great experience. It takes a long time, but it did feel really, really good to have it peer reviewed just so that I could know that these methods do work and the data works. All right. So last week we talked about accrual, just accrual, autopay, invoice, general processes of accrual. Today, we are going to do a deep dive specifically into autopay itself. So autopay visits. Now, we did kind of talk about that last week, and we'll do a couple of reminder slides here, but we'll go a little bit deeper. So the theory behind autopay is you don't have to ask for the money. You don't have to bill for the money. You just do the work, then it automatically goes through EDC. EDC triggers a payment. It sends it over into CRO accrual world, and eventually you're going to get paid. But sites, do you really want to trust your consumers to track your finances for you? No. The answer is no. Why in the world would that happen? There are cases all over the place where CROs mess up, they mishandle, or they forget about certain payments. Sites don't have good books. Who's going to hold the CRO accountable if your books aren't good? So it's really, really important in autopay world that you don't just sit there and trust sponsor and CRO to pay correctly. Believe it or not, even though their infrastructure is huge, they make a ton of mistakes. And it's up to the site to make sure that the CRO is accountable so that those mistakes don't fall through the cracks. So yes, you do work. Yes, you enter data into the EDC. And yes, you get these magical deposits that you have no idea what they're for in your bank account. That's true, but there's so much more around that. So just as a reminder, generally, when we talk about auto pay, we talk about visits. When does the contractual clock start for this? It's in your contract. Take a look, but you're going to have some kind of a payment provision in auto pay world that can pay by the month, by the quarter, it can be biannual, whatever it is, it's by service date when that clock starts. So when the patient comes in, the patient walks out, we go by that service date, assuming that your coordinators enter their data into the EDC within contractual timelines, which is around 48 to 72 hours. So if you don't have coordinators that do that, then of course your accrual is going to be off because for one, you're not following contract. You should be entering data into the EDC within 3 days of a visit. But also, then when you go to start working aging, you're going to be like, hey, this is late and here's why. And they're going to be like, well, hey, this was never in the EDC. Therefore, your accrual never started and never aged. Um, and that happens. So just protect yourself now. Get your coordinators to enter data into the EDC after completing source so that you can have a strong accrual report so that you can work aging later. All right, so how do you get this? So we were just talking about data entry, but if I was a finance department and I was trying to build an accrual aging list, a list of all things that was owed to me, where would I get it from and what would I collect? So one thing to note is, yeah, your coordinators, they're going to sit there and enter data into the EDC, and the EDC is going to go feed CRO void, but your finance team will almost never have visibility into that. That's right. Finance teams don't have access into EDC. So they depend really, really heavily on coordinators to get the data. Now, we don't ask coordinators to go into the EDC and give us something because everything that should be happening should be internal first, your source, your CTMS, whatever it is. And then after your internal systems are complete, then they go over to the EDC. It shouldn't be the other way around. You shouldn't be pulling to complete your records from an EDC. That's because the EDC, again, it's not in your control. You have to make sure that what you control is solid, and then you extend out into the external world. So if I were a finance team and I said, hey, I need to understand what the heck happened at the site this month. I know we had patient visits, but I'm going to have to record it as booked revenue. I'm going to have to record it as something that has happened with a value next to it so I can work its aging and track its progress. Well, here is where I'm going to find it. So ideally, you're going to be in a CTMS. You're going to go into the CTMS reports, and if it's programmed correctly, and if the CTMS is completed properly, then you're going to get an accurate report. So the report is going to sit there and say, okay, maybe here's a time period. I want all of the month of June, all of the month of July, whatever it might be. I want to know exactly what has been happening at this site, what has been entered into the CTMS within this time period. So hopefully in Autopay world, you're going to get a date of service. Again, that's the contractual clock that starts ticking. It's really important. You're going to get the protocol, which has a sponsor. Then you're going to get a trial participant ID, hopefully. So sometimes patients might be entered into the system as a participant, but if they're still in like pre-screening or if they haven't been randomized, they don't have a screening number, you're literally just going to have this participant without a number. That is very, very problematic, especially if you are trying to invoice for pre-screening or any kind of a pre-screening visit. So sites, I highly recommend you work with your coordinators to make sure that at all times, even if you have a pre-screening participant ID that converts over to a randomization number, you always need to have some kind of an identifier that is completely HIPAA compliant for your participant, whether they are or are not in your trial. Now, once you have a participant ID, then you're going to figure out what the heck happened. What is your service? And this is kind of where it gets tricky, and I'll show you a slide later, but that service is in a CTMS going to be very dependent on how that CTMS was programmed. So if you are opening up your IRB approved protocol and you are programming your CTMS, which almost every site does because you need that to make sure you have accurate source, guess what you're not doing? You're not comparing it to the contract. So now what happens if the protocol calls something differently than your contract? Well, finance team, you're going to have to take that service that was reported in the CTMS and convert it from IRB protocol over to a contractual language that actually aligns with what was agreed upon legally. And so then finally, there's the dollar amount. Now, I do not trust the dollar amounts that spit out of CTMS because from my experience, they are very rarely programmed properly. Not blaming the CTMS, I'm not blaming the user, but I am saying that the finance is not the primary objective of a CTMS. The protocol performances, which means all of these things that are on a financial level have a lot of room for error. So if you do pull out dollar amounts from the CTMS, I would not trust them without validating them against your current fully executed agreement that covers that time period. So now, in a perfect world, what's going to happen is I'm going to go into a CTMS, I'm going to click a report, boom, 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 get all this information. There I have it, everyone. I have my list of accrual. That's very rare. So you're probably going to have to go through a level of QA from a finance contract part to scrub a raw CTMS report so that it does actually align with your accrual, your contract, and your dollar amounts. So the other option is calendars. So sometimes sites don't have the sophistication of a CTMS report, so they go through some kind of a time milestone based planning thing where there's a calendar, and the calendar can have all the things that have happened in a month, in a week, some kind of a time period. And so you just pull the information from the calendar and then you put it and populate your accrual table or your report. Calendars can be risky as well, because generally what will happen is super busy sites are going to have a calendar. You're going to have all of these things on there, but then they may not necessarily go back to the calendar and update the calendar in the event of a change. No-shows are very, very common for being on a calendar and for not being updated as a no-show, which also means that you've just recorded accrual that didn't happen. It also happens in the event, like we had a situation where a patient just decided to do a surprise visit. Hey, I was in town. I figured I'd just come in today and get my visit done. Well, you're 2 days early. Well, you're still within window, and that's okay. But nobody ever adjusted the calendar after the fact. They have it planned, this is what we think is going to happen. It's a great forecast. But unless you have some discipline to properly manage your calendar after the event, it's going to become problematic for error when it comes to collecting your accrual. Now, I love the communication pathway with team communications. This is a situation where sometimes if I don't quite trust the CTMS report and I know the calendar isn't actively and routinely managed, I ask some kind of a time cadence, be like, hey, can you just give me the week's activity? Just email it to me, send it to me in some report, whatever it might be. You have a shared SharePoint so you can double check and validate it, or you can try to do it in CTMS if CTMS allows. Then you would be able to have a direct communication with your team members at all times. What we're finding with team communications is that if you do a weekly cadence where you're going to be like, okay, tell me every Friday what happened. Sometimes if they send the report on a Friday and then Friday afternoon something happens, you risk missing out on certain parts of this. So you have to watch on team communications that you don't have communication gaps based off of your time milestones. And a great way to do that is to validate your team communications with let's say that you have teams who communicate their accrual every week, like every Thursday, every Friday, whatever it might be. Validate that to a monthly report pull to make sure that what the team communicated with you is everything that is also in your system. You want system alignment. And then finally, surprise, you just got paid. I have no idea what it's for. Oh yeah, it's for this visit that was never in the CTMS. So if that happens, it's a two-step process. One, you already got paid, so there's no point in making an accrual, but you do kind of need to report the accrual to make sure that it was there and then apply payment to it. So not the best thing to do, and it's really bad on predictors, but if you do happen to get paid and you're thinking to yourself, well, what's the point of doing accrual? You're going to have a negative value in your cash flow unless you adjust for that within your accrual. So all really, really good pathways, all really, really good ways to do this. But whatever it is, your sources of information are a direct result of filling out this table. And CTMS, folks, if you're reading, this is essentially what a finance team is going to need to track accrual. Um, there's some bells and whistles that really aren't that important. Uh, I mean, every site's different, but this is like the crux. If you really, really want to go bare bones, just try to get these 5 pieces of information in some kind of a way that can be fully tracked. All right. So look, we have accrual, everyone. We went through a couple months. We have a little sample accrual here, and there's some really interesting things that are happening here. So you have your date, your protocol, participant number, service, dollars, when it is due based off of your contractual terms, and then the age. So when you look at this, when you're following accrual, you can see a couple of really, really weird things. So, for example, let's say that you've got patient or participant number 001 in protocol ABC. They had a screening visit on March 3rd, but then for some reason, they also had visit 4 on April 19th. Well, assuming that screening visit is visit 1, which we could, sometimes it's different. There's something that happened between March 3rd and April 19th, and that's 2 visits that are not accounted for. What happened? So you're gonna look at that and you're gonna say, "Whoa, what's going on here? Why is this happening?" Another thing to consider would be you've got um, you've got the age. So if I see that on January 15th we had participant number 252 have visit 2, and it was due in February, but we're somewhere in April or May. This sucker is 117 days old. Something's wrong, right? You just look at that and be like, okay, working aging, something's wrong here. What in the world is going on here? You've got a negative value for age. That means that it's not due yet. So age is calculated. You've still got 25 days until the sponsor's late. So there's so many pieces of information that you can get once you start populating a table on so many different levels that you really, really need to use this to try to analyze it. One more that I'll point out, there's a bunch. I intentionally put a number of problems in here, but one that I might want to point out is on January 15th, our protocol DEF had participant number 252. They had a visit 2. Where's visit 1? Where's the screening? Something happened. So you're going to see these little quirks of things that are happening where you have to think to yourself, well, what in the world am I going to do? Well, the first step that you really want to do if you don't have record of this is you really need to talk internally. Something is happening with these visits. Something is clogging them up from getting paid, and you need to understand why. So the first thing that I would do is I would go to whoever has access to EDC, and I would say, hey, it's probably a coordinator. I say, hey, coordinator, I noticed that this visit is super old. Are you willing to check in the EDC for me? Let me know if it's missing any pieces of information. Please let me know let me know what happens. Because if everything's okay in the EDC, then I will reach out to my external stakeholders. I'll reach out to the CRO and I'll say, hey, we checked the EDC, everything's okay. Why aren't we getting paid? And so then I'd have to wait for the CRO to respond. They may give me an answer. And then I may have to go back to the coordinator and say, hey, I talked to the CRO. This is what needs to happen in the EDC. This is why it wasn't paid. This is how we need to fix it. So it's a lot of troubleshooting, working with internal and external stakeholders to try to get your autopay and accrual as healthy as possible. And by healthy in this situation, that age needs to be super young. 0 is perfect. 1 day means it's a day late. You really want to have things paid on time. We have to give the industry a little bit of grace, but 117 days is a bit much. 62 days, that's 2 months old. That's 2 months late. Probably a bit much. There's something wrong in the system for the reasoning of your aging. So really, really important to consider that. Now, one thing to note, and this is something that I realized when we were talking, I never really talked about how autopay and invoice can be mixed. They are not independent of each other, especially like a lot of the super complex trials, the really crazy indications. They're going to pay autopay for a visit. When you enter the data into the EDC, when you do something like that, of course, you're going to get paid. But that is not the extent of the compensation for your site. So prime example is, let's say you have a screening visit, and this is a really low screening visit, but it's a good example. Let's say you have a screening visit, and let's say that the sponsor automatically pays you $1,200 after you've entered the data into the EDC. That is not everything. Let's say that your screening visit had to do radiology. Let's say that there was an MRI during screening, which, by the way, is very, very common because sponsors don't want to inflate the value of your per patient on a screening visit with something like a really, really expensive radiology procedure. So that MRI has got to be invoiceable. Let's say that you took labs, and although the labs themselves were included into the visit because it was a general central lab send out, let's say the dry ice is invoiceable. So you may have to bill for dry ice. What if there's a patient stipend? What if you're not using a vendor, stipend vendor? What if you have to bill for that stipend, or you have to get receipts for the patient's travel and submit it as an invoice? That is an invoiceable that is on top of your auto pay visits. This is also very, very common with unscheduled visits now. Many times, sponsors will pay a flat rate for unscheduled visits, and that's just for PI time, data entry time, coordinator time. But the specific procedures in an unscheduled visit, such as labs or some kind of a service or an assessment, whatever that might be, that is invoiceable on top of your base unscheduled visit. So it's really, really important that if you're not looking at the mix of auto pay and invoice, you have an auto pay and you say, oh, well, we have auto pay, but are there any invoiceables attached to this visit? It's really important if you're not doing that. We've really, really got to take a good look at that, because you may be missing out on a substantial amount of revenue from that visit. So a couple common errors that we have in autopay, and this is what we see in audits all the time. Number one, the number one reason why something is not paid autopay is because it's not in the EDC. The sponsor didn't know about it. They didn't clear it for payment. So that is often triggered if you have a very, very strong finance team, and if they are working aging every month and they're calling it and tracking it and identifying, reaching out if something's super old and figuring out how to unclog it. If they're doing that, you should be able to do that example that I talked about. Talk to the coordinator. Why isn't it in the EDC? What's going on? Get it all fixed. Get that money unclogged. Get that flowing into the site. Start with your internal stakeholders. If everything's good through your internal stakeholders in EDC, start including external stakeholders, figuring out how it works, and we'll go from there. Another thing that I noted, and if you have a really, really strong finance team, I have seen really cool examples of how your aging process, because it's generally on a net 30 term, maybe net 60, your aging process can probably catch EDC queries and incompletes before the CRAs. That's right. So this is how you can use finance as another layer of QA so that your CRAs can have better monitoring visits. It is so cool to see it happen. Man, our CRA didn't even catch that. Well, we just helped quality for the sponsor and the CRO by having an accountable and trackable finance system. I love it when those stories happen. Of course, there's a caveat to that. If you keep saying, hey, this isn't in the EDC, hey, this isn't in the EDC, hey, this isn't paid, and your coordinators are the ones having to be in the EDC, they're going to get super annoyed with you. So give the coordinators a little bit of grace. Give them a week, maybe, for data entry. That's like double what most contracts allow. But it's really, really important to consider who has to update the EDC when you are working aging. It also kind of keeps the coordinators on their toes if you think about it. So it's not in the CTMS. So this is where, again, we got paid and it's a surprise visit. I didn't even know this visit happened. Nobody ever told me. It's not in the CTMS. It wasn't even on our accrual report. I didn't even know I was going to work the aging. Not cool. So there's a couple of Alcoa concerns about that one. That's something you really, really want to avoid. But ideally, you'll find it through a remittance. You'll identify it through internal stakeholders. They'll update CTMS. EDC's already updated because that's why you got paid. And then you'll probably have to make an adjustment to your accrual. It's in the CTMS, but it's wrong. Yep, that happens too. pre-screening visits that aren't part of a pre-screening visit. Sometimes coordinators will break it apart by IRB approved protocol, which is not aligned with the legal contract. Whatever it is, it's wrong. And I can't, this is where, CTMS, its primary job is to help coordinators to run the trial. That is its bread and butter. It's a clinical trial management system, CTMS. You're managing the trial. You're not managing the finances. I know they're trying. The finance systems are there, but it's even the finance systems are not programmed by the contract. They're programmed by the IRB approved protocol, and they're trying to overlap numbers from the contract, but they don't mingle a whole lot in a correct way. So it's from my perspective, if the CTMS is wrong financially, but it helps the coordinator to perform the trial properly, I'll give it some grace. I'll say, okay, thank you so much. We'll handle it from here. We'll do the adjustments in the CTMS as needed. But ideally, it's just a matter of creating the internal systems to correct with how coordinators interact with CTMS versus how accurate it is in your reports. And then finally, it's correct in the CTMS, but it's wrong or missing in the EDC. So this happens in aging, but sometimes it's in the CTMS, but the EDC is misprogrammed. Many times, one of the biggest case studies that we're seeing right now is we're sending like a bill or an invoice for a screen failure. Everything is correct in the CTMS. Everything is correct contractually. We're sending the invoice, and then the CRO comes back and they say, hey, we can't pay this. It's not in the EDC. And we're sitting there like, dude, it's a screen fail. There's no place in the EDC to report it as a screen fail. The EDC is wrong, not the CTMS. Oh, okay, my bad. And then like the next month, the same exact person rejects the same exact invoice for the same exact wrong reason. So they look in the EDC as the source of truth when the EDC is literally just a carbon copy of what should be happening. I really, I don't know, too many vendors. So when that happens, you're going to have to age it. You're going to have to follow up internally. You're going to have to follow up externally. And guess who's going to have to fix the EDC? The CRO. Going back to portals, guess who has to fix a portal if the portal is programmed improperly? It's not the site. So now sites can't even bill or send a request for money per contract. They have to go into a system that is quite literally wrong, and there's nothing they can do about it. So no more portal soapbox. Sorry, guys. Just it's bad news for the industry. All right, so root causes, and this is kind of where it goes back to we have essentially two different systems that are trying to fight each other. So we've got CTMS. CTMS is the system that is controlled by the site, programmed by the site, paid for by the site as a way to organize the information so it can be efficient and perform trials in a compliant way. It generally has an e-source, electronic source, electronic reg. There could be stipends involved. There are finance modules, although I don't have a lot of faith in them. And then, the point is it's a site software. EDC is not. EDC is a sponsor's interface with the site. Sponsor pays for EDC. Sponsor programs EDC. Sponsor controls EDC. But what happens if you have these two different systems and you are literally looking at different documents every single time? Let's say that a contract, which was probably lifted from the protocol, applied different terminologies over to there, applied values to those terminologies, and then was signed, and is a completely different legal document compared to the IRB approved protocol. And then let's say that contract is signed and sent over to a payments team who has to fit that contract language into their standard language, which also creates a whole other person who's trying to interpret these line items in a way where if you call something differently across all these different places, you have just a giant cluster of disaster. So for example, let's say that in a contract you call it visit 4, and the protocol you call it visit D120. course, in the CTMS, because you're programming the CTMS according to the protocol, not the contract, you're calling it D20. But then over in the EDC world, they're, oh yeah, this is month 4. Okay. They're all the exact same day, but we're calling it all totally different things. That's very, very crazy on any kind of a data analytics, sorting, association, affiliation, huge prone to error. Let's say that in the contract, it's an ECG. Let's say in the protocol, it's an electrocardiogram. CTMS, they call it an ECG because they didn't want to type electrocardiogram according to the protocol. But then the EDC folks live in Europe and they call it an EKG because that's one of the German versions. So you're still got the same exact thing, but you're calling it 3 totally different things. And you're going to have to try to interpret it whenever you work on this, whether you're on the finance team or the operations team. The point is, it's important to understand that so many different people are calling the same exact thing something that's completely different. So what about in the contract? You're not even going to get paid for something. The protocol doesn't have it, but the coordinators are like, you know what? This is going to help me to manage my trial. I'm just going to add pre-screening visits into the CTMS because that's how I can organize my patients, get them into pre-screening visits, get in there so we can do all these things. And then that's not even in the EDC. That's literally just an internal process that's designed to help a coordinator do their job. What the coordinator doesn't realize is that generates accrual. That's going to generate metrics on visits for things like zero pay visits. It's a really, really bad metric to have, but it's going to help them do their job, and that they don't care what it takes. They're going to help their patient, even though no other system is going to do it. What do you think that's going to do for a monitoring visit? And I've seen those go bad too. Finally, what's going to happen if in the contract you have a visit 4 that's a phone visit, but you have to invoice for it in case it happens? The protocol doesn't say anything about that in the invoice. The protocol doesn't care, so they just call it a V4. But then because the CTMS programs by the protocol, they're going to sit there and say, well, this is V4, so this is, it's just going to be autopay. They have no idea that you're supposed to invoice for it. So then finally EDC, they're like, oh yeah, this is V4 according to the protocol. Like totally different people, totally different stakeholders, but they're calling something totally different. And sometimes you assume autopay, sometimes you assume invoice, and therefore you just missed out on money and you did work for free. So communication, everyone. Communication is key, and communication across so many different stakeholders that I guarantee you there's going to be miscommunication. This is an absolute cluster to deal with. And if you've ever had to manage site finances, I would predict that you're going to really resonate with these stories because they happen all of the time. So that concludes autopay and accrual craziness, right? Autopay is supposed to make things easier, but sometimes you wonder, with innovation, there also comes some pretty crazy items. So next week, we're going to go into invoice accrual. Totally different pathway, some totally different rules to follow, some things to consider. I'll try really hard not to harp on portals too much, maybe just a little bit. It's worth it. And we'll talk about that. Now, I did count this. Going through the book, going through topics and sections, I'm predicting maybe between 6 to 8 more of these. TrialSide Chats is going to expand beyond these so that we're going to have more people coming on. We're going to start interviewing people now that the textbook is covered in the 2 major chapters of the textbook. We're going to start really expanding and going into an explanation of best practices, or maybe even an enhancement of best practices. Now, I think that there are a number of people who are listening right now. If you have the opportunity and you're willing, could you try to add a comment so I can see what this looks like with this whole comment on the screen thing? If you can listen, if you're driving, please don't hurt yourself, but curious what this is going to look like. And I'll give it a timeout. I think there's a little bit of a lag on here, but invoices next week, we're going to explore them. We're going to do that. And over the next 6 weeks and before SCRS, we are going to have completed this part where we're covering the book, and we'll be going into some different things. October 15th through 17th, Orlando, Florida, SCRS, Site Solutions Summit, 20th anniversary. Oh my gosh, it's been 2 decades of site advocacy, everyone. A big congratulations to SCRS. CRPN is honored to be a part of it. Come see us at booth number 920. Come play CRPN Let's Negotiate, a board game dedicated to deliver to you a negotiation experience that is somewhat realistic within the industry. We'll see how it goes. And come ask us about CRPN. CRPN is free to join for sites. It is demonstrated to be affordable for sponsors and CROs. We will save money. That's the whole point of the system. And it's designed so that everyone can come together to a place where we can understand each other and succeed. There's the CRPN website. There's LinkedIn. There's YouTube. This is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe. Hopefully comment later. Share your voice. See you next time.